Hi there, folks, and welcome to today's Vet Practice in Action webinar series, How to Avoid Creating Zoombies When Facilitating Online Training. We're about 5 minutes away from our kickoff time. In just a few moments, we'll start some pre-session stuff. Otherwise, enjoy the ride for the next hour and so, and we'll be with you in just a few moments. So welcome to Dylan and Loney in the chat box at this particular stage. We're in the webinar room. Great to have you with you today on our Zoombies presentation. Just doing a quick sound check. If you can let me know that you can hear me loud and clear, that would be great. Thanks so much for that, and welcome to Megan, who's just joined us. Let us know where you're joining us from in this big, beautiful world of ours. I'm joining you from a place called Duluth in northern Minnesota, the USA. Hi folks, on your screen you can see some thinkables. Have your best guesses in the chat box. Some great guesses there from Megan. High Road, see you around, Lost in Space, wonderful stuff. I will reveal all the answers after our introduction too, by the way. A warm welcome to everyone that's joining us today. Hi to Andrew, to Dylan, to Karen, to Loney, to Megan and Teo. Welcome to our session today all about those Zoombies and how to avoid them when we're presenting online. Good job, Andrew. Lost in Space. Safety in numbers for Megan. Also a great guest. I will reveal all of the answers in just a sec. So, folks, my name is Mark Ratcliffe. Despite what it says on the chat box at this particular stage, it might say Jason Ash there. We did have, funnily enough, some technical issues coming into the session. I had to log in as somebody else. It is what it is. It is how it is in this particular case. This is one of the sessions in our Vet Practice in Action series. Thanks so much for spending some time investing in your PD with me today. And today's session is called How to Avoid Creating Zoombies when Facilitating Online Training. Now, there's all my details on the screen at this particular stage. I put that one up there in the event that you have a question after now that you'd like to know about and explore a bit further afterwards. All my contact details are there. I'm very happy to grab an email or a phone call and have a chat about some of the content from today and how you can make it real and relevant to yourselves. Before we go any further, folks, I did want to look at our navigation bar. If you are new to Zoom, let's check out how this works. At the bottom of the screen there, you do have your audio settings. We can get the sweet spot there by clicking on that. In the middle of your toolbar, you'll see the chat function. It looks like many of you have found that successfully and have already been using the pre-session time to answer some of those questions too, which is just fantastic. So that's kind of what we'll use there. What I will suggest at this stage, though, is if we can make sure that our responses are to all panelists and attendees, that way everybody benefits from the great contributions that you'll be making during the session today. Feel free to use the raise hand feature during the session. We'll test that in just a few moments as well, but it will also alert me to see if there's any additional questions or something you'd like me to know about during the session. And if you do need to leave for whatever reason during the session today, it's okay, don't be worried. You can hit the leave meeting button, but you'll still benefit from a copy of the slides. You'll get that as a PDF. As well as a link to the recording so you can go back and check out the content that was covered and that you may have missed if you had to leave early for any reason. Now, before I put the video on, folks, I did want to run a quick poll to get a sense for what roles that you are actually doing in the vet sector. So just launching that poll now. So which category best describes the position you hold within your RTO? Is it a CEO, perhaps the RTO, compliance manager, a vet coordinator, trainer, assessor, consultant, or perhaps you have another important role within the vet sector? Feel free to add that to the chat box as well. Let's give that a few seconds, team. And while you're doing that, I'll pop my video on. Let's hit that poll and we'll share the results. So the lion's share of those of you that are joining us live today are indeed trainers and assessors, which makes a lot of sense, I guess. 67% are saying that. And then we also have an owner of an RTO, as well as someone doing another important job. So feel free to let us know what that job is in the chat box. And I'll just stop that share and we'll continue to have a look at what our session overview is all about. So in our agenda, the first thing we'll want to define is what a zombie is. We'll check that out, or a Zombie, I should say. We know what a zombie is, but what is a Zombie? Then we'll check out the facilitation features that will support engagement and interaction, followed by strategies to help attendees to feel responsible for their own learning. In the second half of our time together, we'll look at some simple techniques that raise energy and enthusiasm. And then we'll finish up by looking at 5 things to avoid when facilitating online. And I will invite some final consideration at the end of our time together for action planning and any final questions you might have about some of the stuff that we've been covering during our session today. Now, if you did join us in the webinar room before our official start time there, we did have an opening thinkable there, 6-word puzzles. I think we've got most of them, but so that you can sleep tonight, let's get the answers to these now. Let's check out the solutions. We had middle of the road, followed by see you around. And the third one in the top row was lost in space. Bottom row, we had safety in numbers. Then hold on a minute, which Megan got late in the piece there. So congratulations, Megan. And I think the one we were missing was the last one there, mass confusion. And hopefully by the end of our time together, there won't be any mass confusion about the ways that you can really enliven the online experience and avoid those Zoombies. Now, if you like this, you can check out this and many other options at www.thinkablepuzzles.com/bamboozles. They've got 60 of these there. One you can try every week if you like and have something different for your learners to enjoy. Now, the first item on our agenda was, what is a Zombie? Well, let me start by saying that after more than 400 days in the worldwide pandemic, virtual meetings have kind of lost their charm. And I know that some of you may have actually been, got the difficult news that you're going back into lockdown. If you're joining us from Victoria, you're getting back into the Zoom state, I guess. But the thing we've got to say here is that we need to learn from some of those experiences that may have been less productive and less effective, and make these interactions, getting the best bang for our buck. There's a picture of my team who helped me out with this one. I needed to get an interesting picture of folks that weren't engaged so I could add this to the presentation. So I'll thank them in advance for that help. I guess the novelty of working, learning and socializing online has given way to blank stares and glassy eyes. And certainly this is where we find ourselves. Some people are describing it as Zoom fatigue. Other people are calling it the Zombie invasion. I perhaps want to call it the Zombie apocalypse. And we want to kind of get away from that, look at how we can be, as I said, effective in the way that we use these online mediums. Now, I'm going to run a quick poll already again. I want to get a sense to see whether you believe you've become a Zombie. Whether you're still a Zombie is totally up to you to let me know about. But have you ever felt like a Zombie in an online meeting or a training session? We start to get, I call it the Krispy Kreme moment, where you get that glaze effect there and going, wow, I've got another one of these. I don't even know what time of day it is. I just seem to be on Zoom all the time. So plenty of votes coming in there, folks. I'll just give it a few final seconds. Who has felt like they are a Zombie in a meeting or a training session? Ending that poll for you folks, sharing those results. Well, 100% of those who voted said yes. We have had occasion when we felt like a Zombie. Well, you're in the right place, team, because we want to look at ways that we can avoid that today. So next order of business, team, is to look at facilitation features that support engagement and interaction. And I'm going to break this up into a number of categories and kind of, look at them in different ways. And the first few categories get us set up for success first. Then we'll look at setting our learners up for success. And then we'll look at some of the interaction tools that will facilitate the process. That's how the next few sections will go. So I'm going to look at technical features first. And one of the things I really wanted to recommend to you here is having two screens, two monitors at least. I know that some people work on 3 monitors. It feels like the minority port sometimes there, but I think having 2 screens helps you to present better and be able to see all the presentation controls that you need to have. So for instance, my screens at the moment look a little like this. So on the left-hand side, I've got the actual presentation. That's over there. I can see the slide. And when I share my slides, that's the screen that I'm sharing, screen 2 in this particular case. That's what I've called that one. And then on the other side, I've got my presenter view. And then I can see what's coming up. I can see what I'm doing. And then I can start to overlay some of the Zoom features. So I might grab the information about our attendees today. I might have the chat box there, and I can move those around according to what I want to be able to see on the screen there. And to go one step further, team, I also like using the presenter view, and I'm going to recommend that today. I know that not everyone is using the same format when they are presenting, but I find the presenter view to be the easiest way for me to manage all of the features, not only of Zoom itself in this case, but all of the PowerPoint features that I'll want to highlight as I go through some things. So for instance, this is what my screen again is going to look like with the presenter view, just that presenter view there. But if I highlight a few things I think are important for us. So we've got the notes section there. And I really like this for a couple of reasons. One, it can give us some prompters to remind us of key points we might want to make. Other times it might remind us about what's coming up next. So I'm not using it in today's presentation, but every now and again, I'll have a pre-recorded video of me going to a different site to show you the navigation features maybe of how to use that site and get the information that you need. And rather than doing that live, that's fraught with danger. I'll pre-record that and then add it into the slide seamlessly. But I might want a quick prompt to say, click to see the video. And that way I'm reminding myself when I'm presenting what's coming up next. I'll also sometimes use that notes section when we've got a discussion. and I might pose a discussion question and then have a few prompters to say, hey, here's an example. You might want to think about more of these. So I think that's a really helpful feature to have in that presenter view. Then we've got this next slide view preview, which I think is fantastic because I can anticipate what's coming next. And again, I can seamlessly link into what you're seeing to what's coming next. So I actually find that I'm much more productive in being able to see that. Then I can also do things like the annotation features. So if I wanted to go up there and do things like this, for instance, if I wanted to go and highlight something, I can go and do that if I really wanted to. If I had, say, a diagram I wanted to add to, or I could grab my stylus, I could also do that and start doing those things. I can manage that all from within that same location, which is great. I'll just remove that with the eraser quickly and get us back to our arrow options. Now, the one that's also really useful for us in presenter view is we might want to have greater transparency about what's coming up. And I found this was really useful when I'm running a much longer session rather than the 60 minutes. I might have a session that might be broken up in 60-minute chunks, but my PowerPoint presentation's for the whole day. And I might want to forward cast a little bit. I can click on that, spin through the slides, get a sense for what's coming up, understand if my timing's not quite right. I might want to mix and match. Maybe if I've got a slide with the break times or something like that, I might want to jump into that there. It gives me some choice rather than clicky, click forward and people saying, how come we didn't cover that slide? Why are you clicking forward? I can do that fairly effortlessly by clicking on that area. And then one of the features that I'm sure some of you are already using, but I think is just fantastic, is the area for subtitles. And we'll just have a quick squiz at that now. So I'm just going to turn subtitles on at this stage, and it's not perfect. It's not 100%, but we'll start to see those things appear on the screen there. So we can add a certain level of accessibility to our presentation by being able to do that. So some food for thought, certainly. Now, as I said, it does a good job. It might not be 100%, but it does a pretty good job, even with a thick Australian accent. And I do speak reasonably quickly too. So just turning that off now. The next item on my agenda here are hyperlinks. Now, what I want to say about the hyperlinks is that this is something that many of us probably have used before in a face-to-face presentation. I've sometimes used it when I've set up a game show and people have a response and then it goes to another slide, and it's a non-linear approach there. Basically, based on their response, it goes to that slide, whether it's a yes or no or whatever. But we can use the same thing to involve the group. So I want to give you an example of this and how you might set it up. It's a really simple example, I guess, but I wanted to sort of show you how it can be done in a presentation online such as we're doing today. So let's say we had 3 things on our agenda, and the first thing here that we've got might be I wanted to talk about the headsets that may be appropriate for delivering an online session. And then we might want to talk about some of the communication strategies that we have when presenting online, and then how we can start to encourage or invite teamwork. So they're my 3 topics in my pseudo example here. But what I could do to kind of make it more interesting for the participants is to say, you choose, which of these would you like to go first? So for instance, I can either ask for you to say 1, 2, or 3 in the chat box, or I could launch another poll and say, which of these would you like to start with first? And based on that, you might say, I'd love to talk about the communication first. So I just go and click on communication and it takes me to that slide. And then I can talk about, what I want to talk about on that slide. And then what I've done next is I've added that arrow at the top right, which then takes me back to that slide. And then I can go to the next one and say, which would, after that, do you want to look at next? And they might say, we want to check out the headphones now, Mark. Fantastic. Let's look at headphones. And this is my recommendation of the day when it comes to headphones. Use the headphones that the gamers use, because they're using that stuff 24/7 and they need crisp sound and they need dexterous headphones that are going to last for a very long time. So that's what I've done, and that's what I'm recommending on this particular occasion. And then finally, I can go back, click the arrow back, and there's only one topic left, which is our teamwork. So I can click on that and start talking about teamwork. And one of the things we'll talk about later in this session in terms of the Zoom platform is how we can use things like breakout rooms to get more smaller group, more intimate discussions happening to facilitate teamwork in this particular situation. So just a show of hands, folks, what do you think about the hyperlink as a way to provide choice to our learners? A little bit of preparation, but if you'd like to put your hand up. Otherwise, I'm happy to be wrong on these things, but in many cases, I'm just simply trying to give you choices and ideas to advance what you're doing there. So we've got a few hands up, which is great, and feel free to lower those hands at your leisure. Just hitting that arrow, and let's move on to the next category. So the next category here is the physical features, and top of my list, physical feature-wise, is to stay hydrated. Now, keeping hydrated ourselves, and as well as encouraging our learners to stay hydrated is going to be a super important thing, particularly as we go over long periods of time. And the thing to remember here is that even mild dehydration can impair mood and memory as well as brain performance, and that will affect both of us. You'll start to have deterioration of your cognitive skills, and you need to be on the mark there because you're the facilitator. So you need to have those that regular sippable water there right next to you, easy to take in, and again, you're modeling that performance and that behavior for your learners so they also do much the same sort of thing. Speaking about modeling appropriate behaviors, I do recommend having stretch breaks, and at about the 3/4 mark of this webinar, I'll invite you to take a 30-second stretch break as well. But whether it's a power Pilates or yoga like the gentleman on the screen is doing now, we know that regular stretching will help us to keep our learners focused. And even if you start to lead maybe some gentle stretches that you can do capably at your desk, it's all about modeling that good practice. And we know that it's helpful. We definitely know that it's helpful. And if we want to go one step further there, what we're trying to do is to stay in touch or get ourselves back in touch, because sometimes we feel like we are literally chained to our desks. And that can be a real demotivating type situation there. So getting up, even for 30 seconds, can make the world of difference to, again, the focus and the mood and the tone of our learners. So the key thing to remember for me is that movement is important, even when we're delivering online. We need to reoxygenate the blood. So movement does that. It gets us up, gets us moving. And what this also allows us to do is to reboot your problem-solving systems. And you've probably had this experience before when you've been sitting for very long periods of time. You start to forget how to do things. Whether it's sitting there on your device and you're playing a game, you're trying to beat a level and you're not having success in doing that, or whether you're trying to find the words, typing a report, you can't quite find the terminology or the words, or you're actually having a conversation on your 7th Zoom meeting for the day and you're muddling your words, it's often because the blood is pooling. You've been sitting there for too long. You do need to get up. You need to walk away from it and then come back fresh. And there's something really magical that happens when we reoxygenate the blood. We get that problem-solving skills back. Test it for yourself. Don't just believe me. You know that it's true. You know that it's happened. You've come back to that game. You've beaten the level. You've walked away for 15 minutes. You've come back and you've finished that report. You've found the words. You've had that 1-minute break. You've collected your thoughts, and now you can have a robust conversation in that Zoom meeting. We know that it happens, but let's just continue to plan for that success when we're delivering our training. Now, another way we can encourage this for our learners is to take creative breaks, and I'll go back to that concept of the breakout room. I think that's where we can have those smaller cohorts coming together, and you can do something creative. So in a face-to-face setting, we would often have people in those groups of 4 to 6. They might do a poster activity. They might do some sort of a project. They might give a presentation. But sometimes we forget to do those important networking activities when we're delivering stuff online. So I'm going to suggest, hey, give them those creative breaks. Let them do some interesting things. Even let them create some other PowerPoint slides for themselves, and then they can present that after that breakout room session, and now they're part of the learning. It's not just something that's happening to them, it's happening with them. And then finally, what you can also do, if you think you'll forget, is to set timers for stretching. And you might even make that as part of your introduction to say, when you hear the tone, that's not my phone going off for a phone call. That reminds us it's time for us to stretch. And I think after a while, people get into the routine of it, and it's entirely good process. So that's my spin on things, folks. But listen, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on this one. And here's your discussion question. What is this? What do you do? But what do you do to stay limber when you're learning? What are some of the things that you do to keep that focus and keep the blood circulating in the right kind of way? Let me know in the chat box. What are you thinking? What do you do to stay limber in your learning? I know in some sessions, I know some folks will put their videos off, and then they'll stand up and they'll do the literal stretch there as they're going. So that might be something simple that you can do as well. Dylan agrees. They stand up and doing some sort of an exercise. Karen says we do the head, shoulders, knees, and toes song. I'm loving the concept there. And now you've earwigged me. That's all I'm going to be thinking of for the rest of the day. Thanks so much for that, Karen. Well, I guess the important thing, both from what I was saying before and the information from the chat box, is that these are simple things we can integrate that don't have to take too long. 30 seconds, 60-second stretch break, as I said, can make a world of difference to keeping our learners focused through what we're doing. Loney says that they stand up and deliver so that you can stretch and squat and turn off the video and all of those things. So I think that's a really good point as well. So we can do those things. We can manage it. Importantly, from my perspective, it's modeling it. It's allowing it. It's giving permission for these things to happen. So some good points there, folks. Now, the final category in this section are those interaction tools. So let's have a quick look at these now. The first one I wanted to share was the reaction buttons. So we've used the hands up feature already today. If you're looking at things like Zoom meetings, you'll also be able to do the smiley face and the clap hands and this sort of stuff. And depending on what other video conferencing platform or webinar platform that you're using, there's a range of reactions you could possibly have. You can also invite them to use the emojis within the chat as well, depending on what platform they are using. I think sometimes that's easier to do if they're joining you on a tablet or a mobile phone. We've already used a few polls today. That's a very quick way that we can involve the group. It also keeps them focused because they're going to go back and read the question and respond. Then we've got quizzes. And sometimes if your platform doesn't allow for quizzes directly, you can reframe your polls to turn them into a question with alternative answers. So you might have, here's your question, you've got 4 alternative answers. You need to lock in the one that you think is most correct. So that's when your poll can be turned into a quiz. We've already mentioned breakout rooms. And again, I think that there's some really great features within the Zoom meetings that allows you to do that. I'm a huge fan of that. I love it for our internal PD as well. It just allows people to have that smaller group discussion. And then I'll do what I normally do in a face-to-face setting, is that I'll create arbitrary sort of team leaders by saying things like, the person who woke up the earliest this morning is the team leader for this breakout, and they're the person who's responsible for providing a summary of the discussion, let's say, or to talk us through the strategy that they're about to talk to us about. So from that perspective, folks, I think you can do similar things that create interesting environments for the learning, as well as making sure that everyone has a different contribution. Because of course, if we do this a number of times, we don't want the same team leaders each time, so that we mix it up and use different features, if you like. Then we've got the shared whiteboard. So this is where the learners also have permission to do that annotation. And we can either do that as an overlay to some other information, or simply as a blank whiteboard. I sometimes use it as a fill in the blank and have the learners kind of write some extra stuff. Or maybe it's I've got a list on one side and then some pictures on the other side. You need to connect the right word to the right picture. The next idea on the interaction tools is a conceptualization or a visual metaphor activity. And let me explain what this might look like. So for instance, I might have something like these 5 ducks in a row, and I might say to the group, how does this picture, or how did this picture of the 5 ducks relate to our content today? So in the context of our session today, we might say, well, when presenting online, we need to keep our technical ducks in a row so we can confidently and successfully deliver our content. But again, we might give that as the example, but then invite them to think about what other ways could this be done? What other meaning might this picture have? So it could be a visual metaphor, could be a conceptualization, but it's a lot of fun. Another one that could apply in this particular case is that presenting online is a bit like the ducks there, because above the surface, we want to remain calm, but underneath the surface, we know that we're going at it, trying to make everything come together. But as long as everything on the top seems calm, then our learners are going to have a great experience. So that's how we can kind of connect the visualization or conceptualization to content. And the final category here are those chat functions. And we've been using the chat box quite a bit already. But I wanted to sort of suggest here that there are different ways that we can frame this chat responsibility. So what I've been doing today mostly has been posing a discussion question. We could also ask learners to solve a puzzle, problem, or riddle, which again is an activity that we model today in our pre-session stuff. You might instead invite participants to share a fun fact about themselves, or maybe an interesting statistic that they learned about the content coming in. You might prompt a response to a closed question. So again, this could be a true, false, yes, no type thing. Or this might be that variation where rather than running the poll, you put the quiz question with 4 alternative answers on the screen, and then have them use the chat box to put A, B, C, or D as their response. The next idea here is to ask attendees to caption this. I think this is a fun activity, which can either be directly related to your subject matter, or it might be a fun thing just to keep the learners energized as you're going through the day. And that's the example I wanted to share with you now. So take a few moments, have a look at our picture. We've got our giraffe up in the tree. I'd like you to think about, what could this mean? What might you caption this as? And put your best ideas in the chat box. It's certainly an interesting image. So put your creative hats on, folks. What might this be saying? What might be a caption that could be added to this? And as you're thinking through that, I'm going to grab a quick drink. Some of you might be wondering if this is photoshopped or not, but it's actually not photoshopped. It's an actual giraffe in an actual tree. So how could we caption this one? Got a couple of ideas I might share with you while you're percolating the captioning on this one. So in terms of my first crack at this one might be, my Insta is going to blow up with this pic, brah. So that might be a fun one. And Dylan says, my answer is a long shot, unlikely to be true. It's a good one as well. Or another one that I prepared earlier was, oh yeah, you were right. I'm definitely afraid of heights. So then they're sort of stuck there in the tree there. But like I said, team, this is the sort of thing that can be fun as a breakup of the content, or we could also make it directly related to the content. So if we're talking about things like communication or dealing with difficult customers, or maybe something to do with workplace health and safety, then having an image like that where you can add a caption that talks to content could help to promote reinforcement of that learning as well. But listen, if you think of any others, feel free to add them to the chat box and we'll circle back to them, and I'll definitely honor those as we go through. But again, it's just another choice to add to your online trainers kit bag today. So we have struggled to come up with a caption this at this stage, but a quick show of hands, who thinks they may be able to use this caption, this activity in their own setting, perhaps with some tweaking and maybe with the right kind of subject matter. So we've got a couple of hands there, which is great. You might also find a variation on this that makes it work for you, and feel free to add those variation ideas if you have them now in the chat box as well. And to continue the dialogue, team, what is your favorite online interaction tool? It might be one of the ones that was on my list, or it might be something else you've seen or that you use currently yourselves. Let me know. What is the favorite collaboration tool or interaction tool that you like to use, either as a trainer or as a participant? Put your best answers in the chat box. From my perspective, you'll notice this through my presentation, I tend to have the chat feature, the polls, and the discussion points that tend to be my areas. Dylan says quizzes is a key interaction tool. And that also helps us to check for understanding too. So particularly when we're talking nationally recognized training that we might be doing, it's always good to get that formative idea of how they're developing, making sure they understand those key things before we move on. Karen also likes the chat features. Lonely likes the breakout room discussions, the polls, and the quizzes as well. So it looks like we're all on the same page. We're in agreement about the things that we like. So moving right along, team, let's have a look at those strategies that help attendees to feel responsible for their own learning. And this is one of the things that a lot of the research has been telling us. When people pivoted to online learning during the pandemic, and certainly well after it's changed in Australia, we found that students kind of felt isolated and felt like it was happening to them, and they didn't really have an opportunity to make some decisions about their own learning and managing that. So let's look at some of these strategies now. I think the top of my list is not to make all the decisions. I think one of the things that learners like to do is to be empowered by choice, and choice is really important because it feels like that they are able to have some control over what comes next. And if we put our minds back sort of 15 months, there was so much out of control. Giving our learners a sense of control is going to be a winning strategy. So in terms of some of the choices you could give, we could use agenda voting, which could be a variation on that hyperlink thing I showed you earlier, where we have all of our items there, and then the learners can vote which of these is the most important for them. Now, this doesn't mean that you're not going to cover everything, but what it does do is it helps you to understand what's going to add the greatest value to that group. So you might spend a bit more time on different topics based on the preferences of the group, or you might use your break time to then find some additional websites or other resources, white papers, publications, fact sheets, and whatnot that you can share based on those preferences as well. Or like I said, if the order doesn't matter, and these are sort of 6 topics that don't have to be covered in a particular sequence, then we can give them a choice about which of these we're going to attack first. And the one that has the most votes goes first. We can give them choices about responding to a poll directly, or if they prefer to use the chat box only, they can respond in the chat. The choice of virtual background is kind of fun there, and certainly one of the cool things that Zoom allows us to do, and it's not just Zoom, but Zoom certainly has popularized it more recently, is allowing people to change to all sorts of different backgrounds. So in terms of our presentation today, maybe I'll go with something more like this. But we can invite them to do that, or they can choose my Zoom background for the day. And again, we can vote on 3 of our favorites. So sometimes the smallest choice can have the biggest impact for our learners. So some food for thought. You can choose to have camera on or camera off. Now, I know this is something that a lot of trainers get frustrated with. I certainly, when I'm running the meetings version of it, you don't have the choice during the webinar version, clearly, but in the meetings version, it's sometimes frustrating when people turn their cameras off. But you have to recognize not everyone is comfortable with you seeing into their homes, and particularly if it's an environment which is a shared space. Either they've got kids and family members and spouses, and there might be a share accommodation where they've got friends and strangers sometimes in the space, or piles of laundry ready to be folded. Sometimes people feel embarrassed about that, or they might feel embarrassed that they don't have the latest technology and you can see them there, or maybe they're in their pajamas, they're in their their Winnie the Pooh onesie and they don't want to share that for the day, and that's okay, but having that choice, I think, is certainly an important thing. And then I find that over time, if we start talking about why we would want the video on, certainly through breakout rooms, there's some real value in that. We can start to give them opportunities to feel safe, and it doesn't have to be all of the time. But again, in the end, it's their choice to bring it back on because now they do feel safe and secure in that space. You could have the use of your real name or maybe a fun alias. And perhaps I should have gone about making that change in my own situation there. Because for those who joined us a little bit late there, I did have some of those technical issues, and I had to change over back to my name. But I'm actually logged in as Jason Ash. But of course, you can make that change. You can have whatever name that you like. So in the meetings version of it, this is how you might go about changing your name in Zoom. So you can click on the participants button. Looks like this one. Then we can hover the mouse over the name of the participant list, and then click move, and then select rename. And then finally, we can enter the name we'd like to appear on the Zoom meeting and click OK. So like I said, you don't necessarily have that option during the webinar version, but next time you're in a Zoom meeting, you might want to call yourself Marky Mark Ratcliffe or something like that, whatever floats your boat. But you can have some fun with it. Again, it adds some extra choice there. And if people want a sense of anonymity, you can also create that there. Now, a quick tip when it comes to this as well, particularly with that meetings version of this, when we've got breakout rooms that are going over multiple weeks, I might have a team that's working collaboratively. We might organize them into, say, groups of 4. Or 6 or something like that, if it's a much larger group. And then we'll have group 1, group 2, group 3, group 4, group 5, et cetera, et cetera. Once we've determined that, we might invite them to actually put their group number at the front of their name. So it's very, very easy for us to identify, okay, I now need, so and so from group 1. I need Karen from group 1 or Lonely from group 2. From that perspective, it actually makes it a lot easier for us to manage some of that discussion rather than saying, can I have a volunteer from group 6? So I found that that's quite helpful, particularly for those longer cohorts. And I've run a few of those. I ran a 10-week program last year for two groups of Chinese educators, and this made it so much easier for us to identify those things. It also made it easier for me too, because often the names were using their Chinese characters, but if they used the number 1 there, I was able to say, okay, I did someone from that group 1 there, fantastic. I'm gonna invite you to speak and share your ideas now. We can encourage personal goal setting. And I think this is actually something that many of us would do in a face-to-face setting. But again, we forget to do it when it comes to running stuff online. So investing some time early, getting them to think about what do they want to achieve as a result of this time together is super important. And as the Spice Girls would say, tell me what you want, what you really, really want. And to make you feel old, for those who remember their debut single, their breakout hit Wannabe, that is 25 years old this year. Zigga zig ha indeed. The next idea is to invite questions on notice, and this will give them some control over the content that's going to be covered, and also empower them to say, well, if this is what they want to find out, let's let the presenter know ahead of time, and that also gives us an opportunity to prepare something robust and informative that can really help add value to their learning, which is great. Then it's important for us to facilitate discussion. We need to allow it. We need to give permission to discuss certain content, prompt diverse views. Sometimes we have to set up that devil's advocate type approach as well. Again, like we would in a face-to-face setting, let's think about, well, what's another way that this could happen? And hey, that's a fantastic idea, but do we see any challenges from a management perspective here, or are there any compliance issues that we might need to consider in the implementation of this one? So that's all part of that facilitation of the discussion as well. And then promote sharing, and there's dozens of things we can invite our learners to be sharing. I'll give you a few ideas now. We can have them share examples either that they've experienced or examples that they've seen from another source, or perhaps from the courseware if they've been doing some asynchronous learning before they come to the synchronous stuff. So if you've got a blended approach there, you might say, okay, during the week, you had a chance to watch some videos, do some reading. What are some key examples that relate to today's topic? Or maybe it's a personal anecdote, or maybe a case study, so that we're building meaningful examples, not just XYZ making widgets. You could have them share concerns, and that concern could be course related or content related. We can have them share pictures, and in another course that I've run recently, I had people do a photo share from their window. So it's hashtag view from my window, and we had all sorts of weird and wonderful images from where they were joining us on the Zoom. Again, rather than them feeling uncomfortable about showing us inside their house, most people have felt comfortable taking a curated video, I might add, of what they might see from a window in their home. But I found that kind of sharing of pictures actually helped people to connect more closely and got to more conversations, saying, oh, well, that was a really interesting picture. Did you take that yourself? Or I didn't realize how, that you had such great greenery in that suburb of Melbourne, let's say. So what it does do, it helps us to open up other connections and other discussions, which promotes the intensification of those relationships, which is entirely good. And then at appropriate moments, we can have them share screens. So we can give control over to our participants. And like I mentioned earlier, this might be the outcome of a breakout discussion where they put together a short presentation which summarizes what they talked about, and then they present that back to the rest of the group. And then finally, we've got encourage action planning. Now, that's one of the final things we'll do in today's webinar. I think it's an important part of any session, to be honest. This is the advice to ourselves from ourselves. We're more likely to implement the ideas we've come up with rather than simply going back and having a look at the notes that's provided by the instructor. Now, if you don't like action planning as a phrase, I've got lots of variations that you might like instead. I've got next steps. So at the end, you might say, we've covered some interesting stuff today or some controversial things. What are your next steps? Or maybe if you're in the chess, you might have got back into the game after the Queen's Gambit binge watching on Netflix. What are your next moves? What are you going to do next? But the critical thing here is that there is something that happens next. We're not just attending training and then forgetting everything that happened. We actually have to do something meaningful to add value to that experience. Another one of my favorites is seeds or weeds. So in this particular framing, we're saying, well, what's going to help us to grow, and what do we have to remove that's actually holding us back from having a beautiful garden in our workplace situation or in our life? Sometimes another variation of this one is choose or lose. What are you going to choose from today's session? What are you going to choose to do next? And what things in your practice are you going to lose or stop doing? And then the last one in these variations is adapt, adopt, apply. I like the thinking here. It gets people to go one step further to say, well, not everything that you may cover in the session is going to be 100% applicable in its current format, but you may be able to tweak it. You might be able to rearrange it. You might be able to take parts of it. What does that look like? So again, I think prompting those ideas for actions at the end will help to give the content life after your training session online. So a quick discussion point, folks. How else could we help attendees to feel responsible for their own learning? Best ideas in the chat box. What are you doing out there now? What are you loving in some of the sessions that you have attended that make you feel responsible for the learning that you're undertaking? In really simple ways, giving you opportunities to discuss these things give some ownership back to you. So you're making sure that you've got those opportunities built into your sessions, I think is important as well. So what are we thinking, folks? How else could we help attendees to feel responsible for their own learning? Lots of typing going on, I can see. Maybe we can connect the dots back to things like that goal setting. So they set the goals up at the start, and then at the end of the session, well, what actions are we taking to fulfill those goals, moving back to our unique workplace situations. Karen says to give takeaways at the end of the session. And these could be quite literal takeaways, couldn't they? There could be some extra bonus materials, ebooks and the like. Dylan says students ask questions and need to do further research. So that could be a way for them to get breadth and depth to maybe some of the narrow content that you cover in a webinar situation such as this. So a couple of great ideas there, folks. Love your thinking. So as promised earlier in the session, we are 3/4 of our way through our webinar. And I wanted to give you your 30 seconds of Zen. Here's your quick stretch break. Feel free to have that power Pilates, a downward dog, salute to the sun. And we'll be back in 30 seconds for the final part of our time together. So team, hopefully you were able to get yourself limber again. You've stretched it all out. You've got all the kinks out of your neck and ready for the final part. Before I move on to our next topic, I wanted to honor a question in the chat box from Loney. And what they're saying here is I have set up goal setting, but still find it's not happening for a lot of the class and are a bit lost as a result of that. So I think in many cases, when we're online, we still feel kind of isolated and there's no one keeping us responsible for that. And it can become labor intensive for the instructor to be that person. So maybe it's around facilitating some of that stuff via a breakout and maybe call it a cohort or a family, so rather than just a team, that they're the family. And as a group, they come up with individual goals, but they are also accountable to each other for those goals. So at different times, we said, we're going to go back to our family breakout groups now. And I want you to see how you're going with your goal setting now. And are we getting closer and closer to that? We might even have them actually do something old school and have them get those, goals put up on paper and put near their desk or up on their wall. And then when we come back to the next session, we can say, well, how are we going with this one? Let's add the notation now. Which of these can we cross off? Which of these do you need to let me know about? Pop them in the chat box, or maybe private message me to say, these are some goals that I still haven't achieved yet, and maybe we can work together to making them a reality. So there are a couple of strategies, Loney, that hopefully will help you get back on the righteous path with that. In my next category on the list, folks, is simple techniques to raise energy and enthusiasm. And the top one on my list here is to use music and sounds. I wanted to start off by thinking about music. If you joined us before the session started officially, we had a little bit of music there to sort of set the tone and the mood. It was a little compressed. I normally would have liked to have been on a little earlier, but like I said, I had a few technical challenges as we were just about to log into the system. So I'll follow that up down the track, but I'm happy to be here now, which is the important thing, I should say. So in terms of music, I think we can consider different beats per minute, depending on the kind of experience or tone or feel or mood we would like to create for our group. So for instance, we could use a slow beat as a way of leading people in, so it's not too in their face. So as they enter the room, perhaps we could do something like this. And then when we talk about beats per minute, that's at about 80 to 100 beats per minute. As we're going through the ebb and flow of certain activities, they might be doing, say, just some personal thinking, some journaling type stuff. You might have something around that 100 to 120 beats per minute. And then perhaps if we really wanted to really get the energy going, and sometimes I'll do this as we are finishing an activity or as a transition between activities, or certainly at the end of a session, sometimes it's like thanks so much for your time, you guys have been awesome. It's a motivating type thing, something that 120 to 140 beats per minute like this. it's hard not to actually start to go with that beat. Now, a quick question in the chat box there again from Loney is, how can we set it up to be heard in the waiting room? Now, depending on the platform, if we're using Zoom like I am today, all I've done is I've embedded that sound into a slide and then animated it. So I at a click, it then comes up. I could do it as a jukebox if I wanted to, using those hyperlinks in much the same way. So I could set it up that way. If we, again, wanted a choice of the type of beats per minute people were looking for, we could do that too. And that might be a fun activity as well for learners to have some choice about what's happening in that virtual jukebox before the session happened. Just be careful about the levels of that, because it's going to be a little different than what you're hearing. To what your students will hear, or what the attendees hear is at a different level than what you're hearing in your headphones, which can be a little bit challenging moving forward. In other platforms, it doesn't do it. It doesn't allow you to do it from the PowerPoint, even though you can hear it, they can't hear it. But in Zoom, certainly have to choose optimization of sound and or video. If you're going to use both, you have to make sure that those there's two boxes at the bottom of your screen. When you share your screen, you have to make sure those boxes are ticked, and then your participants should be able to hear that in the waiting room or whatnot. And then other platforms will have dedicated music for waiting room as well. So I guess it just depends on what platform you're using. So that was music. I did say music and sound. So we might be talking about something like evidence. We might be doing something in assessment, let's say, and talk about the importance of evidence. And I can use a sound like this. And straight away, we've got the reference to what that might be like in creating robust evidence to put it beyond reasonable doubt. Another technique we can use, and I've certainly been using it today, use those video title boards. And then we can use that in combination with the music. So from that perspective, folks, we're just creating some interesting effects. Now, another interesting effect might be an animation feature. Now, the animation we're seeing now is actually something that's native within the latest version of PowerPoint. So that's the PowerPoint 365 version. So from that perspective, it's got a whole bunch of these that you can do by choosing the insert video, and it's stock video. That's what I've used there. Or if you're, someone who likes to, do their own animations, and certainly, I'm certainly not an artist, but I wanted to give you an example of how you can use the draw feature within PowerPoint to create your own animation. Here's a little monster based on our Zoombies situation. They're saying, "Eureka, I have the answer." Now, it's very, very quick drawing. I have used my stylus on my tablet to make it happen. Very, very quick. And all I've done is simply grab that drawing, and then I've asked it to animate like I would any other feature in PowerPoint there. So what it does is it sort of draws the attention in of the audience, because there's something different, and it's coming at them in a different way than simply the standard things that they're seeing on their screen. And then don't forget the choice. We should be really providing a smorgasbord of options to keep our learners engaged throughout. So what are some of the favorite ways that you like to encourage energy and enthusiasm online? Feel free to add your best ideas in the chat box, team. They could be similar to some of the ideas we used before in terms of interaction and collaboration. It doesn't have to be, of course. It's about creating energy and enthusiasm. I've certainly found whenever I've used music and whatnot, it's definitely made a huge difference to the ebb and flow of that session. Lonnie says, sharing a funny story. I mean, storytelling is great. And that narrative can actually help to talk to content as well. So even though it might be humorous, we can use that to draw the attention of the audience in, and then reinforce the subject matter just as easily. So I like your thinking, Lonnie, on that one. So if you do have any other ideas, feel free to add them to the chat box, folks, but I will continue on. We've just got 5 minutes left. Although Dylan says an informal chat prior to the session to insert humor is another way of kind of making people feel comfortable in the space. But our final topic of the day are 5 things to avoid when facilitating online. Now that image there is super creepy. I've just realized that now when I look at my big screen. Super creepy, 5 things. But keeping with our zombie or Zombie theme, at the top of the list here is we just, being unprepared is a big no-no. And we've already identified that at the beginning of our session today, some key things we can do to set ourselves up for success so that we can be the best version of ourselves in presenting the content that we've got. So some of the key things to remember is to get on early, test the technology, organize your screens, let other people know that you're running a session. So if you're in a busy workplace, let them know, hang on, I'm on a session in the house. You know, I've got to let my wife and daughter know. And then I also have to make sure that the dog has been out and he's not going to be whining at my door to let me take him outside and so forth. So all of that is an important part of the feature. And don't forget that sip of water just before you start, because you don't want to start with a dry mouth. Number two of the things to avoid is avoid overloading your slides. So, you know, in this case, consider the cognitive load. There's only so much that we can take in that's going to be able to be processed. So in this particular case, we can enhance our cognitive load by using white space to draw the eyes in. You'll notice I do quite a bit of that, using those crisp, clean images that complement the text, highlighting keywords with a different color for impact. Again, we've been modeling that through our slideshow today. And then remembering that less is more, particularly when it comes to the PowerPoint slides. You don't have to have absolutely everything you're going to say on the slides. And certainly if you think you might forget something, add that to the notes section and just have the key points that you'd like to share on the screen. The third thing to avoid is not engaging with your audience. And what happens when we don't engage with our audience, folks? What's the negative side? What's the downside of having no interaction? It reminds me of a session I attended about 4 years ago now, where the first question was at minute number 59 in a 60-minute session. So pretty much we had death by PowerPoint for 59 minutes. Then say, oh, do you have any questions? Yeah, we did 45 minutes ago. So again, we need to be involved, otherwise we're elsewhere. There's so many other things we can be distracted by, particularly in the absence of proximity control like we would have in a face-to-face setting. If we don't engage our audience early and often, they're off wandering, you know, in another direction. And as Dylan says here in the chat box, they just won't learn that if they're not engaged. Number four, in terms of the things to avoid, is forgetting the impact of body language. Now, this is a really important thing because online presentations often need more of you, need more energy than you would have in a face-to-face setting. I know it sounds counterintuitive, but I've only got this space here. So I've got to kind of amplify all of that. And that's because that's all I've got. So, you know, if we're being too reserved and we're being motionless, that will make for a boring presentation, and therefore our learners are going to be less engaged once again. And number five, and it kind of goes together with this one too, is forgetting to smile. And I do have a former colleague of mine ringing in my ears with this one. I remember this is 10 years ago, we did a video series, and I was doing it up quite late at night. And after doing 6 or 7 takes of each one, I just wasn't into it. And he'd be saying, smile, smile, mouthing the words to me. And I always remember that, you know what, we have to remember to smile, because if I'm not having a good time, then you're not having a good time. And if I'm not smiling, then it sort of seems like this is all too serious. And in the end, people aren't going to be engaged by that as well. So in terms of our final poll team, reflecting upon those things to avoid, let me know which of these you think is most important. Is it being unprepared, or important to avoid, I should say? Is it being unprepared or underprepared, overloading your slides, not engaging with the audience, forgetting the impact of body language, or forgetting to smile? Please vote now. Let's give it a few final seconds, folks. I'll share those results with you now. So those who voted, 80% saying being unprepared is at the top of our list, and a further 20% saying not engaging with the audience. Well, thanks for that participation, team. I think we are yelling at us there saying definitely being prepared is the number one thing we need to remember to do. So we are at the back end of our time together, folks, and is your opportunity to have any final questions or think about the actions that you'll take as a result of our time together. I know that we've hit top of the hour, but feel free to let me know any key actions you'd like to add about what you're going to do next. Maybe try one of the techniques, perhaps do some additional research. Let me know in the chat box. Dylan also says there, if you're underprepared or unprepared, you're less able to engage. Because you really don't know what's happening. You're flying off the seat of your pants there. So I definitely agree with what Dylan's saying in the chat box. So as I said, if you've got a question or a comment about what's coming next, feel free to add that information now. And I'll let you know about some upcoming webinars as you're doing that. So we've got a couple coming up in the month of June and July. So we move away from facilitation. We go back to some different areas in that TAE space. So how to create sustainable industry engagement on the 11th of June, and then validating online assessment on the 9th of July with Damien out. Quick question in the chat box. Laney says, did you use the PowerPoint to show the quiz in the rating room as well? So I pretty much have just the in the webinar version of it. I will bring people in before the start and have all of those things on a rotating PowerPoint. It's a little different, I guess, when you're running the meetings version of Zoom, but you can still post questions to them from the main room, if you like, there. So you can definitely do some of those things. You won't see PowerPoint in the same way, but you can still be communicating with them, which works within our platform there. So team, I am mindful of your time. Thanks so much for investing in your PD, as I said at the start of the session. Thanks for playing. I do appreciate you being here and your enthusiastic participation in the chat box. I know we're a small group, but listen, I love the ideas you come up with. If you do think of any other things you would like to know about based on their content today, all my details are on the screen right now. I'd love to hear what happens with some of the tips that I've shared, and hopefully we've been able to add some extra value to your online presentations and avoid having more Zoombies in your own classes. In any case, team, feel free to exit at your leisure. Don't forget, you will get a copy of all this presentation as a PDF, as well as a link to this recording, so you can go back and check it all out, and that will come out within 2 business days, so somewhere between Monday and Tuesday next week. So thanks so much for playing, team. We look forward to seeing you again on another Mr. Wet event. Until then, have a fantastic rest of your day, wonderful weekend, and bye for now.